Thank you very much for this opportunity to present part of the research conducted as part of my master's dissertation. There may be a lot less fun in this presentation than the last one. The pandemic caused a rapid increase in the use of EdTech to facilitate learning online. It positioned EdTech as an industry in which large profits were to be made. Private funding via venture capital firms increased dramatically, as did the number of funders wanting to get involved and the amounts invested. The growth in funding has since fallen, but funding delivered this way still plays a significant role in EdTech. Another significant group behind funding are those who would term themselves philanthropists, though sometimes described as others as philanthrocapitalists or venture philanthropists. The sums they invest, along with their other activities, exert huge influence on EdTech. Wherever funding comes from, it determines at least what EdTech is available, and potentially much more. EdTech funders, both philanthropic and commercial, are dominated by those from the business, finance, and corporate technology sectors. They bring with them their values, their assumptions, and their ideologies, which go on to impact the discourse on EdTech, not just influencing thinking, but making reality. Therefore, wherever the motivation for funding EdTech, understanding the funding and the funders of EdTech is essential. Though there's no single definition, social justice is a term widely used, often to describe the redistribution of resources and opportunities in society. EdTech has become part of an imaginary where its very presence brings around good, but Selwyn encourages us to be critical where we see such causation suggested. McGilchrist takes this further, warning that such belief leads us into cruel optimism, a scenario in which pursuit of an unrealistic idea of how to achieve a goal actually prevents its achievement. Using Selwyn's technological pessimism, Clark challenged EdTech being claimed as an instrument of social justice. He saw the student being positioned as a consumer, shifting the responsibility for success to them and ignoring structural inequalities. Evidence for this imaginary and the cruel optimism within it can be found at the highest level of influence. It is therefore important to look at funders' understanding of EdTech, social justice, and if and how they make a link between the two. Language is a key element informing ideas and shaping actions within any educational context. According to social theory, discourse is not just language used, but also a way of thinking which simultaneously controls what can be said. Discourse analysis studies language, not just in terms of its linguistic structure, but in terms of what is behind it, to reveal understanding or thought patterns which construct belief and actions. Critical discourse analysis aims to bring greater attention to matters of societal hierarchy and power, addressing the underestimation of the significance of language and how it contributes to the domination of some groups over others. Although we focus on the literal use of language, there are aspects of language which can potentially tell us much more about people and organizations. One of these is metaphor. In terms of metaphor in EdTech, Weller points out that it's important to realize how each one frames the view of technology which becomes its reality. Since metaphors underline the concepts giving rise to language, they may reveal the way an individual or organization thinks. Metaphors may reveal ideologies or assumptions, and this knowledge could help us challenge dominant discourse. This study examined material authored by EdTech funders for evidence of their understanding and underlying ideologies. Text was samples from the websites of a range of large and hence potentially influential EdTech funders, both philanthropic and venture capitalist. Website text was chosen as this was public and again made it likely to be influential on the discourse. Following preparation of the text, critical discourse analysis was undertaken, examining how each funder appeared to understand EdTech and social justice, with critical metaphor analysis of the same text to look for evidence of underlying ideologies. Information on the activities in which funders were involved, mentioned in these texts, was mapped against a social justice framework based on the work of Fraser to determine these funders' specific understanding of social justice. Critical discourse analysis revealed major themes that were common to all the funders studied. Not surprisingly, they all talked about EdTech, although they viewed it different in practical ways. Fundamentally, they described it having similar properties. All these funders used terminology suggested that they saw EdTech as a passive entity under their control, with innate qualities simply needing to be made available to be realized. EdTech, when spoken as an enterprise, was a business like any other, with no special status due to its link to education. There was a strong indication in many funders of underlying ideologies of scientism and dataism. Their version of science speaks with one voice, gives certainty, needs no critique. Everything can be measured, and data is complete, faultless, with no limits to what can be known. More data is always better. Social justice, though commonly alluded to, appeared to be superficially understood. The focus was always on access to EdTech. Where there was a suggestion of stakeholder engagement, it was questionable to what degree those stakeholders were actually included. Structural inequalities were ignored or underestimated, with success always down to the individual. Metaphor coding was carried out for the purpose of investigating the ideologies of these funders. 19 conceptual metaphors were identified and grouped into themes, of which 6 related directly to the research topic. These themes were present in the text of almost all these funders, whether philanthropic or venture capital. What follows are some examples of these themes. Building is a common metaphor, though unsurprising, it was used by all the funders in this study. This metaphor, when used, can suggest a strong and secure edifice, but also one that is designed and therefore under control. Though personification is common in everyday speech, it's important to note its presence because of its persuasive potential. This metaphoric theme demonstrated that these texts and their authors are far from objective as they might like us to believe. This theme includes metaphors that offer EdTech either as the solution to a problem or a key to unlock an issue. This theme was used by all but one funder and feeds into the solutionist imaginary of a broken education that EdTech can fix. The wide use of market and goods metaphor could be expected given that all the funders have had experience of business. Using this metaphor suggests that either funders see education as a business sector, just like any other, or would wish to persuade others that this is the case. Nature and faith are popular metaphors also, so not surprising that we saw them. These metaphors suggest how things are meant to be and accepted, or should be, and aspire to. These metaphors also incorporate assumed status, suggesting that they are possibly beyond critique. Kroller points out how metaphor can be used in this way to gain unearned legitimacy. Measurement comparison features as a common metaphor. Such a metaphor gives an impression of a well-ordered system that is under control and feeds into the metaphor of EdTech as a mechanism. Descriptions of activities and projects supported by funders in the text selected were mapped against Fraser's framework of social justice. Fraser names 3 injustices. These are economic, cultural, and political. Fraser divided responses to these injustices into affirmative and transformative. Affirmative responses acknowledge that disadvantage exists and seeks to lessen or eliminate the consequences. Transformative responses seeks to lessen or eliminate the underlying causes of disadvantage. Of those funders that spoke of their activity in terms that could be mapped this way, 3 did not. An affirmative response to maldistribution based on access to EdTech was common to all. No funder suggested the transformational response of restructuring the economic model responsible for maldistribution, or even acknowledged it existed. Of those funders that offered an affirmative response to maldistribution, almost all also offered an affirmative response to misrecognition, but mostly this involved actions such as including a wider range of stakeholders. Of all the funders, only 2 philanthropic funders alluded to a response to misrepresentation. Causal links between EdTech and social good are made by EdTech vendors and funders, but also repeated by governments and educational organizations who may be persuaded by the promises of EdTech made by those who see them as authorities on the subject. This can result in cruel optimism and potentially the denial of justice. Philanthropists have a vested interest in portraying EdTech as innately beneficial, which they may indeed believe. If this is true, then all they have to do is offer access to EdTech to enable anyone else to potentially achieve the success that they have. However, this is an act of cruel optimism at best, since access to EdTech in itself will not address social justice in all but the most basic way. Funders can believe that they are doing the work of science with EdTech its tool, a tool that can fix not just education but all injustices in life, mainly through the mechanism of earning more money, for which education is simply a means. And while such funders continue to be able to play a significant role in the funding of public education, as well as deciding who needs help and what constitutes a good life, they can maintain this EdTech imaginary and prevent the emergence of others.